Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, like this is a question, and it sounds like a very very basic question to ask. But I have a feeling that most Indians and most people across the world are not even sure about the answer, which is that how is a head of state of China even selected? Because it's not an election. But that entire that was one of the questions. That was one of the first few questions I wrote down, and I still find not an incredible amount of sort of clarity on how that happens. So how does it happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. The short answer is the Communist Party chooses it. Uh, we don't know how they do it, but it's just done internally. In the last 10, 20 years, there's been like a mix of different factions within the party, where it's essentially a situation where different people owe their allegiances to different figures in the party. So, just to give you a small example, before Xi Jinping took over and he disrupted this internal dynamics in many ways, in the past, you always had two different groups, and each would sort of, and they would kind of bargain internally. Of course, it's not transparent at all. And they would kind of decide in the top level of the Politburo Standing Committee, which in the past had 9 people. You would say have 4 guys from one faction, 5 guys from one faction. They would divvy it up internally. And someone, I'm sure the Chinese are not going to like to hear me say this, but someone to me explained it very simply as it's kind of like how a mafia would work, in the sense of in the sense of you have different families with different allegiances, and they kind of come to a understanding, informal understanding of how to run things, right? So, but then that was done internally. So the party meets every 5 years for a congress, and that's when they choose the leadership for every 5 years. And but they do want to give it kind of a stamp of legitimacy. So what they do is, once they've internally chosen who's going to be the next guy, then they have a system where they actually have a parliament of about 2,600 people who are party nominated, and they would vote uh, on this selection. So, for example, when she was nominated, they voted, and if I remember right, I mentioned in the book, I forget the exact numbers, but I think it was something like 2,683 for and one abstained. So everybody joked like possibly it was him,
Yeah, yeah,
because he thought that it was 2,684 and zero, it would look not so great.
yeah, yeah.
So that's how it works. In short, it's done internally through negotiations between various groups in the party. But I think what Xi has done is he's accumulated power so fast that he's shattered, I think, a lot of these things, and it's pretty much a one-man show now. And in the past, it wasn't a one-man show. Even when it was Jiang Zemin's time, Jiang Zemin had to have the former leader Deng Xiaoping over his shoulder. When Hu Jintao took over, he had the previous guy Jiang Zemin kind of watch over his shoulder. And some people in China felt it gave the system some stability, because it wasn't like a dictatorship in the Middle East or somewhere where you have like one guy, or even North Korea, where you have one guy or one family, right? You have like the system kind of had its own checks and balances because it was collective in a sense. But I think it's a big risk for China, because in the last 6 years, 7 years, she has pretty much stopped the collective leadership system, and it's a one man show. And I think that obviously comes with a lot of risks as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because there's so many things to talk about in this, because this literally sounds like how the Indian National Congress would elect a president, right? Like, so, I mean, they haven't, which is a different thing altogether. Or let's say the BJP is electing a president, and that person is immediately like, hey, you're running the country now, which is quite a leap. And what I loved was that in the book itself, you mentioned that to try and at least create the sort of facade of that this is a multi-party system, the two other parties that are the lead parties, what are the names again?
No, actually, there are, I think, 7 other parties. So, and all of these were existing when the PRC was, as People's Republic was established in 1949. I think there's like a Workers' Party, there's a League for Promoting Democracy, there's like a Peasants' Party, and all this stuff that goes back to 1949. And they still exist because they want to present this veneer that they're a multi-party state. So officially, it's a one-party rule country, but the upper house of the parliament actually has representatives from all of these parties till today. And I've interviewed some of these guys, and it's always quite funny that they go back all of these years, but they pretty much just function right now to kind of put a rubber stamp on whatever the Communist Party is doing.
Yeah, because I remember the two parties that you had mentioned. One was the both had democracy in their name.
Yeah.
I was like, this is hilarious, and it's like, but I mean, obviously, the format at least works for them as a country. And this is a discussion that I was having. I don't know with whom, where the more you sort of read about global affairs, the more you realize that democracy is not the norm for quite a large part of the world. Like, I think the reason why they keep saying that, hey, this is a big thing that India is the largest democracy or whatever it is because the rest of the world doesn't really have it. I mean, not the rest of the world, but like probably what 35% of the world probably doesn't have a format of democracy. It's either a monarchy or whatever else it is.
Yeah,
Um,
no, and I would just add to that in the sense that, like, I'm always sort of wary of looking at it as a democracy versus dictatorship binary, because among authoritarian states you have such a huge degree from Singapore on the one hand to North Korea. Democracies, you have a huge sort of spectrum as well, where you have Europe on the one hand, and now I'd say you have the United States. I mean, so you have like a big spectrum, I think, on every category.
Yeah, the United States one is something which is, I mean, like, I think I mean, this is going to, like, I can imagine being a leader of the United States and the kind of, if you go to another country and comment on how things are happening there, if the immediate response is going to be like Capitol Hill. That's, you got nothing to counter that. Okay. They recently, the one of the news that popped in was about Xi Jinping. I'm going to get all of these names wrong. He basically removed the limit on the 10 years. So, I want to know a little bit more about that, and also whether there was any resistance to that from the rest of the Communist Party, and what that means. Does it essentially mean that he's going to rule, aiming to rule, like till death, or what is the plan? I mean, what's the end goal of that?
No, I think that's for me, that's the single most important change that he's done since he took over. So he took over as the general secretary of the party in November 2012, and then as the president of China in 2013 March. And so one of the most important things he did was stop this 10-year term limit. And to be honest with you, it was really unpopular at the time among everyone that I spoke to in Beijing, whether it was professors or journalists who worked for Chinese papers. No one thought it was a good idea. I remember so clearly the very day it happened, and we were covering this in the parliament in Beijing. And I remember taking a taxi back home, and the taxi driver actually told me he was so disappointed and distressed by this, and he actually told me, he's like, we're becoming like North Korea. So that was the initial response. I clearly remember at the time was really negative, and people were really concerned that a system that worked well for them, for a authoritarian country to have three peaceful transitions of power was unique, which China did from Deng to Jiang Zemin, Jiang to Hu, and Hu to Xi. So and so for them to break that, I think a lot of people were worried. What would this mean for the future when you have this system of succession that's been dumped in the dustbin overnight? And I think that that's still a question we don't know, because in 2022, next year, he's going to finish 10 years in term, and I'm pretty sure he's going to carry on till 2027. So every 5 years they have a Congress. So I remember initially, once there was such global pushback against this all over the world, people I think looked at China differently after he did this. I think the Financial Times had an interesting story where I think Xi Jinping had met with international CEOs, with American and European CEOs, and he apparently told them at the time that, I can't believe people are saying I'm a president for life. It doesn't mean I'm going to rule, till the end. So I think it's possible that he'll stay on. I think health will be the biggest question mark. And it would be interesting to see how he was 59 when he took over in 2012. So that still gives him some time. So, I mean, compared to Trump and Biden, he's still younger. Yeah. So I think he would carry on for, I would say, definitely 5 more years, health permitting, till 2027. And beyond that, it's anyone's guess. It's quite possible that he may hold on to one. As I mentioned in the book, there are 3 titles that give him his power. One is the head of the party, the other is the head of the military, and the third is, as president, is kind of actually the least important. We call him President Xi Jinping, but it's just a title that they give. So he looks like a president in the eyes of the world. In Chinese, there's no word for president. They call him the national chairman. But in English, they call him President Xi, just because I think it connotes to the world that he's an elected president. In a subtle way, I think it connotes to the world that he's just like any other president. But I would say that it's possible he may hold on to one of those 2 titles. I'm just speculating here, but it could be that he still hasn't found a successor. I think he hasn't appointed anybody right now who's really clearly framed as somebody who's going to take over from him. there are 2 or 3 provincial level party leaders who are known to be close to him that he's promoting, but none have the experience yet to take over. So it could be that he's grooming somebody and he would maybe hand over to them 5-6 years down the line at the next party congress. I don't know if he could always, since he could give them the titles and hold on to power, that's something that's not going to stop him in any way. But I don't know if he's going to carry on till he's 80, 85 like Mao did. I mean, I don't think he would do that.